Good evening and welcome to Library Advisory Board meeting. We are glad you are here. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Due to recent changes to Oregon Public Meeting Law, our meetings will now be recorded. Once the video is processed by the city web team, it will be published on our board's web page for public viewing. All public attendees are invited to participate in the meeting at the designated opportunities. If you could like to take a moment, make a comment or ask a question, use the raise hand function on Zoom to indicate so, and we will unmute your microphone for you to share. You can also use the chat feature at any time or submit a question using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Sara. All right, so first off, I guess I call the meeting to order at 6:05. And we'll start with introductions again. And this time, everyone say a book they're looking forward to reading, either because it hasn't come out yet or because you just haven't got around to it. For me, there's some brand new books coming out by Brandon Sanderson. He made a surprise and said, here they are, they'll come out next year. I'm not telling you anything else, surprise. So we'll move around the loop. Glenn, do you have anything you're looking forward to?
I do, Andrew, but I'm very embarrassed to admit that I have a book on hold, has not come in yet. I requested a number of weeks ago. I was very excited to read it, but I can't remember the title. It's a work of fiction, which I don't normally read, but something about it really captured my attention. And if I can think of the title or the author, I'll let you know.
All right, well, I'm glad that you've got it on hold and it'll come in eventually.
It'll be a surprise when it does.
Perfect. Mei?
Actually, I don't have any in mind, but there's a book that I want to read again. When I was in the college, I read a book called To Kill a Mockingbird. And that is a very good book. I want to read it again. And I'm trying to book it through, got an ebook of it. So looking forward to it.
Perfect. All right, Kathleen?
I'm looking forward to reading a book that has already come out and I have no excuse for not reading. It's the last in the series, the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. Daughters of the Deep, I think is called, and I just haven't gotten around to it. But
that happens. All right, well, I hope you get to it at some point soon. Cathy.
I just picked up a book that I had on hold. And the funny thing is I put it on hold forever ago, so I don't even really quite remember what it's about, but it's called Girls in the Stilt House. So I'm excited it finally came and, hope I enjoy it, but I put it on hold like forever. I think it must have been one I read about when I was reading about books and just thought, oh, that sounds like a good one. And now I finally have it. So hopefully I enjoy.
Yeah, sometimes it's great to have a hold book and then it's a surprise when it comes in. Sara?
I don't have any books. Future books are past, but I'm looking forward to read Sherlock Holmes books again to have some thinking to myself about the ending, how it might end, and guessing whether mine is right or wrong. So I'm looking forward for that.
Sounds good.
Thank
Helena?
Hi, I'm looking forward to reading the book Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann. My friend recommended it to me and I really enjoy like short stories and a collection of short stories. So excited to get that when it comes off of hold. Yes.
Perfect. And Kristin?
Helena, that's one of my favorite books. I love Colin McCann. He's one of my favorite authors. so I can't wait to hear what you think about that. Let the Great World Spin. I'm looking forward to Hanya Yanagihara's To Paradise, because her book, My Little Life, was one of my favorite things about the pandemic. It was like reading that book kind of saved me through the pandemic. It's a really great book. So she has a new book out, and I'm on hold, and eventually it will come in, and I can't wait.
Awesome. All right. So next order of business, has everyone had a chance to look over the minutes from last time? And any comments, any discussion on what's written there? Right. If you're all happy with it, do I have anyone who wants to make a motion to approve them?
I'll make a motion.
Do I have a second? I think Sarah's hand went up first.
Yep.
All right, so we have a motion to approve the minutes as written. We'll take our vote and then we'll see if we have to have Kristin do anything special. So all in favor?
Unanimous that it passes.
All right, thanks, Kristin. All right, so our next item on our agenda is public comment. I don't see any members of the public here, so we'll move on. The city council report. The city councilor is not here. I think she said she was going to be staggering her visits, so maybe in April. Partner reports. So Beaverton Library Foundation.
Yes, I can report on that, Andrew. Pleased to say that the foundation board is now up to 5 members, up from just 2 members a year ago. So we're very happy to see that that board growing and increasing in membership. And recruitment is currently underway for a secretary. They were going to vote in a treasurer last week's meeting, but unfortunately they didn't get a quorum, so they couldn't do so. And they are also considering hiring a part-time fundraiser to help them raise additional funds on behalf of the library. And then lastly, at our city manager's request, we are starting work on a memorandum of understanding with the foundation, which will outline the roles and responsibilities of the foundation and those of the city. So make sure we have that in writing. So that concludes the foundation update.
All right, thanks, Glenn. And then next up is the new friends. I don't know who got to go, so Kathleen, then you're up. You're muted though.
I'm taking that on this week.
Perfect.
That was, they met on the 22nd. I'll try to go over things briefly, but this is my first time reporting, so I hope it's all right. Let's see. It was brought up that at 6 months, so in June, they'll reassess budget for office supplies. A member named Cheryl will know more about grant applications, so that topic was deferred for the next time she's in attendance. Carrie did a store operations review. She says there have been employee changes, so things are chaotic, but everyone's doing really well. They're still working to stay with COVID guidelines and doing well at keeping on top of it. They have 47 regularly scheduled volunteers, so they've gained 2. There have been a little over 9,000 community donations and 200 from the library. 40, they have 40 donations outgoing to school classes. There is $51 in sales for Abe books and 145 from Discover CD sales. And the children's section has been reorganized. They discussed the nuances of selling via eBay versus Abe books. And Carrie's going to review results for the Amazon sales channels forecast revenue, which are going quite strongly. This will also be reviewed in 6 months, and they'll work on aggressive but achievable goals. Roger reviewed operational statistics, and Carrie's taking over goal setting for that. Sarah reported on marketing. Dave wants to better identify who their patrons are so they can better target ads to them, and proposes a survey to get demographics. Man, they're all anxious for the mask mandate to be lifted. They extended into June the COVID lead policy, which supports staff who have to call out due to being ill. They're reminding people of the opportunity for local artists to display and sell their art at the library, because they recently streamlined this process. They also mentioned the opening of the Research Gallery as a potential place to advertise the book corner. They talked about employees who have not submitted their vaccination status and restated their masking policy, but took further discussion to email. We spoke a lot about Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, which I have a lot of notes on, but the bottom line was that BCL was not super enthusiastic about the huge scope of undertaking a partnership with the organization, but there's a keen bookstore volunteer who's taking that on by forming a 501c3 and wondering if they could use the bookstore's address as a registered address. And they're inviting the keen citizen in question to attend the next meeting to address their concerns. They're reinvigorating Monsoon, which I found out is a way of automating multi-channel sales. They voted on accepting financial statements. Previously, the board approved the LSTA grant to buy a bookmobile. Apparently, the timing of that made it a very exciting process indeed. Friends agreed to pay for decals and painting if that goes through. They voted on sending the memorandum of understanding for review by city attorneys. They voted on accepting the proposed budget pending the review of the adjustment for Abe's books. And there was a call to vote on bylaws, but was referred until the planning retreat, which is some Saturday morning in March. And the next scheduled meeting, I guess, is the 15th. And I'll be at that one too. If anybody has any questions, I have additional notes, but I didn't want to take up too much of the board's time.
Did you say the next meeting is on the 15th of what month?
Sorry, this month, the 15th of March, next Tuesday.
Okay, all right. So there will be a meeting between our meetings. I wasn't sure if it had gotten shifted.
Yes, it was originally scheduled for the 8th, but I guess it got pushed.
All right. Any questions for Kathleen about the new friends?
No, it's not a comment, but it is. I just wanted to take time to thank Kathleen for stepping into last meeting and last moment when I was pulled into the meeting by the city. So thank you, Kathleen.
All right, any other comments or questions about the new friends? All right, thanks, Kathleen. Appreciate you guys going to these friends meetings. It's really helpful. All right, our subcommittee is doing a great job.
It was fun. They were all very nice folks.
Great, I'm glad to hear that. All right, in that case, I guess we'll move on. Next up on the agenda is the Teen Library Council report. So Helena, I think you're up.
Yes, thank you. So TLC, we recorded another podcast episode, and that should be up on the website. And we're preparing for upcoming TLC events. We're turning towards younger children, and as they are able to come back into the library, we want to host a kids spring crafts fair, which is going to be in April, where kids can create crafts such as beaded bracelets, tissue, paper tulips, and ladybug rocks. And upcoming in March we're going to host the Teen Summer Reading Art Contest and judge for those. Also in April is going to be the poetry contest, and this year's theme is going to be Ode to an Inanimate Object. And at our most recent TLC meeting, there was a former member that came in to talk about her college experiences as an incoming freshman, or as a freshman. Yep.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Helena about what the teens are up to? All right, thank you very much for letting us know. Appreciate it. Next up on our agenda, moving right along, is the Children and Teens Area Use Policy. So you all should have received the updated version of that. They made the changes I think we suggested. So does anybody want to discuss that policy? I know we went into it a lot last time. Any additional comments about it before we see about moving to a vote?
Yeah, it looks good for me.
Okay, very good, Sara. If everyone else had a chance to look it over and doesn't have any issues, Mei, do you have something?
Yeah, just my personal interest. That's about the teen area. The last item which mentioned that there are supplies provided. What are these supplies? And how about and also the borrowed items? Is that all those supplies has to be borrowed before they can use it, or just leave it in somewhere they can just pick it up and use it and return it back? And then what are those borrowed items? Just for my personal interest only.
Sure. So the supplies are provided or are kept in the teen area. And the borrowed items would be things like, stapler, scissors, Scotch tape dispenser, those items which we encourage folks who borrow them to return them so that they're available for others to use.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions, I guess, about this in general? Kathy? All right. In that case, do we have any motion to approve this updated version of the Children and Teens Area Use Policy?
I can make a motion to approve it.
All right. Do we have a second? Mei. All right, so the motion is to approve the Beaverton City Library Children and Teens Area Use Policy as sent to us with all the updates. We'll take that to a vote. So all in favor, raise your hand. All right. I think that's everyone, but just in case, all opposed. All right, Kristin?
That was unanimous to approve the revised language.
Excellent.
Thank you, members of the board.
And Glenn, please convey our thanks for them updating it as we taking our advice into consideration.
Will do.
And then I think the new business on there, I'm pretty sure is mostly stuff that Glenn will know all about. If you want to take it in any particular order.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Andrew. All right, let's start off with the South Cooper Mountain Library Branch project update. I will jump to that relevant section on the director's report where I have that information. Okay, here we are. So there's a parcel of land that was purchased by a developer just west of the Mountainside High School, which has been identified as a mixed-use development. So a combination of housing, residential and commercial development, and also potentially the siting of a branch library that would ultimately replace the current branch at Marie Scholes, whose lease, by the way, runs through January of 2026. There was some preliminary architectural programming and design concepts work that was done about 2 years ago, but those plans need to be updated before that can be brought before the city council for them to approve moving ahead with the project. And towards that end, there is $75,000 that has been earmarked from the first tranche, the first pot of ARPA funds that the city received from the federal government to, develop the architectural program, what we want to do in the space, as well as develop some design concepts and a cost estimate, put a price tag on it, so that we could bring that before the council. However, and there's another $125,000, which is part of the tranche 2 ARPA funds, which are subject to council approval during, I believe it's the April 5th council meeting, that would provide all the necessary funds to do that work. So if the council does not approve the second set of funds, then not all of that design and cost estimate work would be able to be done at this time. It would have to be deferred to a later date. So there are a number of milestones clearly that need to be met, and approvals that have to happen in order for this project to go forward. And even if council approves the funds and the design work proceeds, that would still require council approval of the design before the project can actually go out to bid for construction. And then, of course, council would have to approve the project and approve the funding for it, which currently there is no funding in the city for this project. So in order to make that happen, unless we received a significant donation from some as yet to be identified source, most likely the city would go out and for a bond measure in order to raise funds for the project. But that said, this project would also be competing with some other construction projects that have been identified as needed by the city, including a cultural community center, which was identified as part of the community vision project, as well as a much needed new home for the public works department, which has outgrown its existing space. So this project is far from being a done deal. There are quite a few approvals that need to happen, both in terms of funding and otherwise. The next milestone, as mentioned, is council approval on the second set of funds to be able to conduct all of their relevant programming, as in architectural development of the architectural program, design and cost work in order for the project to move forward. So with that, I will pause and take any questions that members of the board might have.
So Glenn, is the goal of this library to replace the Murray Shoals?
Yes, that would be the ultimate goal, to be a replacement library for the existing branch, which is a leased space. So the city does not own that space. Rather, they lease it from the owner of the property of the strip mall and the Murray Hill Shopping Center. And this would be an opportunity for the city to design and eventually own and build from scratch a brand new library. And then it would also, there's an opportunity for it to, depending on the outcome of the development of the architectural program, could also include space for community meetings, in addition to dedicated programming space for library events and programs.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Oh, Kathleen, did you have something?
Yes, I was, you said something about 75K being earmarked for, and then my brain
Yes.
didn't catch the rest of that. Then there was a
So-
bond measure.
Yes. So the $75,000 would be part of the funds that would be needed to complete the next phase of the project, which is developing the architectural program, developing rudimentary design concepts, and then also a cost estimate. So those are the three things that would need to happen next. And $75,000 is part of the funds that would be needed to do that. The other part of the funds needed to do that is the $125,000 earmarked as part of, for that project, as part of the second tranche of the ARPA funds, subject rather to council approval at the April 5th meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So if you feel strongly about this project, one way or the other, you might consider reaching out to the members of the council and or the mayor and encourage them to support it.
Since this would be a Beaverton library, we would have advisory oversight, assuming it was done. Is there anything at this point that the advisory board needs to do?
No, Andrew, only insofar as, you know, again, if this is a project that individual members of the board, or collectively for that matter, I leave it to the board to decide how they want to proceed, wishes to support the project, then one way to do that, of course, would be to reach out to members of the city council, the mayor. That could be done via email. That could be a letter that the board may wish to draft and support, or not. If the board decides that they're not in favor of the project, that would also be an opportunity to express that as well. So I'm in no way trying to prejudice this board in terms of you know, their feelings on the project and whether or not they choose to support it. I'm just simply pointing out a method in which they could communicate those the feeling about the project to the elected officials.
All right, thanks, Glenn.
So what is the other side of this if it is not approved? Once the lease ends, are you going to renew it back, or what is the?
That is a good question, Sarah. So assuming that the city wishes to continue having a second location, assuming that there are funds available to do that, if this project does not move ahead, then most likely the city would be looking at that point to renew the lease at the current location, unless some other space, a preferable space becomes available in the interim, whether that be lease space or potentially space for purchase.
So which is cost effective? So going with the new building is cost effective, or continuing the same lease, or looking for a lesser cost?
Well, in the long run, owning a building is going to be more cost effective than leasing. So, and I'm not sure at what point, that happens, whether that's at the 10-year mark, the 20-year mark, but at a certain point, the cost of ownership is going to be less than the cost to lease. Similar to, renting an apartment where your expenses go up every year, and your landlord may, as mine did, increase your rent by 10% or more, versus having a mortgage where you have a fixed rate. So after a certain period of time, your costs may actually decrease. So.
Yeah, that's true, but we have to see where that you balancing out the leasing and owning a building. We need to see. That's what, as you said, like 10.
Well, I can tell you this: for the cost of ownership over the life of that building, presumably it would be built for, let's say, at a minimum 25 years, maybe 50 years. Over the lifetime of the building, it would be less expensive to operate than continuing to lease space. That much I'm fairly certain of, although I don't have the exact figures.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what the cost of the actual cost of but just generally speaking, cost of ownership is, in the long run, is going to be less than leasing.
Yeah, if the city wants the land, then it's only the building cost for the library. Then we can talk to them. Yeah, because last time I heard like the opera fund is going to be your, it's for the backup or the budget gap amount. Are we going to give the opera amount to the building, or it for the contingency money for the library?
Which fund, Sarah? I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Opera fund. Yeah, opera.
Oh, the ARPA funds. Oh, yeah. So the ARPA funds, there's only a limited amount of funds that are being designated for this project, and $200,000 to do the programming work and the design and the cost estimate work. But I'll give you, just to put it into context, when the preliminary design work was done about 2 years ago, the cost estimate for that project, if memory serves, was approximately $14 million to build a space, a library building that was just slightly larger than the footprint, or the square footage rather, of the existing branch.
I guess I was wondering, for the new branch, are you looking to create something bigger, something more like the main library, or is it going to be like a smaller, something kind of like the size of the Murray Shoals?
Yeah, it definitely will not be, we're not looking to recreate the main library, but rather it would be, as with most library branches, you have smaller footprint, smaller collection, and certain types of services depending on the demographic, and a variety of other factors. So, there would be a community input process to develop the architectural program to determine exactly what we do in that space. But one big advantage of it is, and this was also included in the preliminary designs that we did 2 years ago, is the 12,000 square foot space that we developed as part of that, which is just slightly larger than the one at the branch, included dedicating programming space for library programs and events, which we currently do not have at the branch. And it would also double as community meeting space, which is much needed in the community, as some members of this board might be aware, that would be available after hours by members of the public. In addition to having a a collection of similar size to the branch and other services. But again, this would be a new process, and so the actual programs and services that will be offered at that branch are unknown at this point. But it would not be. It would be a scaled down version. It would not be an attempt to recreate what we're doing at Maine.
And maybe this is something that you probably talked about this when you talked about doing this initially. How was that location chosen? I was just curious in terms of like the mountainside area.
So apparently this precedes my tenure. There had been a desire to site a library branch that would be owned by the city for some time, again, to get out of the lease, because reasons previously mentioned, it's generally speaking preferable to own space as opposed to leasing it for a variety of reasons. And there had been several attempts to try to site a location for a library branch the city could own unsuccessfully. And then this opportunity became available once this parcel, the owner of the parcel just west of Mountainside High School, decided to sell. And the parcel was purchased by a developer. And then in subsequent meetings with the developer liked the idea of a mixed-use development with a library branch as the anchor for that development.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Glenn about, oh, Mei, go.
Yeah, just want to know if everything go on smoothly, when will we have that library? Because it is actually very close to my home. And
yeah.
Cooper Mountain, the area there is,
Yes.
I'm sure the population is increasing.
Yes.
There's a lot of new builds here around the high school. So
yeah.
we definitely need a branch there, actually.
Yeah, and that is another reason why, as it also follow up to Cathy, your question about the siting of this location, is because it also aligns with the fact that the South Cooper Mountain area and South Beaverton is the fastest growing part of the city and currently doesn't really have any city services available in that part of town. So that's another factor in its favor. And then, Mei, to your point, to your question, if all the stars align and everything goes according to how it might to move ahead with the project. So I'd say, what are we now, beginning of 2022, or entering the end of the first quarter, actually. We're probably the earliest that branch could be, construction could be completed and available go online would probably be sometime in 2025 at the earliest, based on the information that I have available.
We have a good time. So at the start of the 2026, if the lease ends before that, a new building will be there for us. Keeping fingers crossed that new building will be approved and every fund will be sanctioned.
Thank you.
So does the board have anything more we'd like to discuss about the Cooper Mountain as a board?
So I have a question. You said like we are including the community space. So is that the space cost also belonging to the library, or that building cost will be done by the city? On a whole, it is the city is going to provide the fund, but how far it's like how far it's the library side and how far it's the city side?
Yeah, so in preliminary design, Sara, there was space that was designated for programming and events and community meetings. It was a one space that during the day would be used for library programs and events. And at night, it would also compete with both. It would be available for evening library programs and events, and also community events and meetings, and also would be accessible after hours. So after the library closed, it would be designed in a way where it would be accessible after hours. And so the total cost for the project would come from most likely a special bond measure. So the funds would not come out of the library's budget. So it would be city-owned property, it wouldn't be owned by the library. The library is just a department of the city. So just as the main library is actually owned by the city and the library department is located there, but should the city manager decide that maybe it makes more sense in fulfillment of council goals for public works to occupy the main library, the library staff could get booted from that space. Unlikely, not likely that would happen, but just to, we serve at the discretion of the city manager and the council in terms of how they want to allocate resources in support of council goals. So if that means, having community space available in a new branch library, and that's the will of the community as supported by the council, then that's what we'll do. Then again, there would be an opportunity for this board as the advisory board to the library to weigh in on that.
Thank you. Good information to know.
So as a board or as individuals, do we want to do anything in particular related to the South Cooper Mountain Library branch with respect to the city council?
Well, I think it would be worthwhile to write a letter from the board. I didn't know how that would go because I know there's like rules about communication and you have to include certain people in your emails. So I didn't know. I'm assuming it's not something we do during a board meeting, but I wasn't sure how we would go about communicating that with each other. Does that make sense?
Yes, I don't know how you do it either. Glenn, do you have insight? Like if we did a vote with our opinion, would that be sufficient? And then you send?
One approach could be you could have a letter signed by all members of the board or signed by the board chair on behalf of the entire board that could then be sent to the all the elected officials. So that would be all members of the city council and the mayor. And that can be done via email. Send that as an email attachment. And those email addresses are available on the city's website. So that's one fairly common way to have your opinion known. Another is to consider sending, as opposed to a letter, as an email attachment, you could simply send it in an email message, either individually or from the chair on behalf of everyone. That said, I can just tell you from my experience that a letter always carries, generally speaking, carries more weight as opposed to an email message. So if you're looking for greater impact, then the letter would be the way to go.
And we can address the same issue when we are presenting the library board, library advisory meeting in front of the city, yes. One of the presentation, when we are doing the presentation to the city members.
Yes, when we do our report. Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, so it was just one comment, and that's true. You can certainly do that then. However, in order for the project to move forward, the funding, the tranche 2 funds, the $125,000 that have been earmarked in the tranche 2 funds, which is being voted on, I believe, at the April 5th council meeting, would need to be approved. So if those funds don't get approved, then the project would have to be deferred until such time as those funds could be located. And that could be a year or more, just given what I know about the budget situation. So if the board wishes to see the project move ahead, I encourage the board to consider making its thoughts known to the city council, the elected officials rather, prior to the April 5th meeting.
Well, I guess I was wondering, are other people interested in writing a letter as the board, or did people want to contact the board as individuals? I'd be curious to know what other people thought.
Kathy, I just make one slight correction. So it's actually members of the city council.
Oh, okay.
So that's the term by which that governing body is referred to. They're members of the city council. And the mayor, by the way, is also a member of the council, but she just has a separate title. But she just had, as mayor, according to the new form of government, as a member of the council, has one vote along with every other member of the council. They just have this title, honorific title, but they're all members of the city council.
I vote for anything. I'm not sending an individually a letter, and my votes, I'm not ready for that. So I vote for anything the team decides on.
Does that make sense, Kathy?
So it sounds like Sara would be interested in a letter from all of us. Mei and Kathleen, do you have a preference?
Sorry to be annoying. I just don't have a preference.
Yeah, if we were to send a letter, we'd want the board to, as a whole, approve of what's in it. Or at least a quorum of the board, which is basically most of us. Mei, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think we can just prepare one letter for the whole board and send it out. Or if anyone, any individual would like to write, they may write individually again. So, but anyway, it would be better to have one letter from the board, from all of us.
Okay. I don't know, because it probably doesn't make sense to write such a letter during the actual board meeting. How would be a good way to go about this procedurally, Glenn? Do you have a suggestion?
Yes, I don't think there's any conflict with the board. Now that the board has discussed it in this public forum and agreed to write this letter, I don't know that the actual writing of it needs to be a public process, but rather that can be done not during meeting time, and then just shared with members of the board via email to get to develop the actual content, since you've all agreed to do this. And then once you have it, you know, in a the content that's approved by everyone, since you've already acceptable to everyone, since you've already agreed to do this, then at that point, I think you just could go ahead and submit it. And I'd be happy, by the way, to look at a draft if that would be helpful, and suggest some, you know, points if that would be helpful to the board.
All right, so I guess two things. One would be, I think we might want a motion to officially say that we want to do this, so that it's on the a record that everyone voted for or against it, so that we confirm that it's something that everyone is interested in. So do we have a motion to write a letter? I'm assuming proposing that we like the Cooper Mountain, in case I misunderstood. A letter saying that we'd appreciate if the city council would move ahead with the Cooper Mountain branch library project.
Yeah, South Cooper Mountain, by the way.
South Cooper Mountain Library, sorry.
Yeah, there's three Cooper Mountains, by the way. There's North Cooper Mountain, there's Cooper Mountain, and there's South Cooper Mountain.
So to be, I guess, more precise, to go ahead with the South Cooper Mountain branch library project, a letter in support from the board as a whole. Do we have a motion to that extent?
Yeah.
Okay, Sara has made the motion. Do we have a second? All right, Kathy, in that case, all those in favor of this letter?
Aye.
Okay, all those opposed? Kristin?
The board voted unanimously to write a letter from the board in support of, to the council in support of the South Cooper Mountain Branch project.
All right. And then the follow on, is anyone interested in actually writing this letter and then sending it around for feedback from everyone, including Glenn, to make it pretty?
I would know for that.
All right. So this is a volunteer. You don't have to, Sarah.
So the first word is from me. So no.
I could try to put something together and see what Glenn thinks of it.
All right. If you're happy with that, that's, and then we'll all want to look at it probably and make sure that we're happy with it. But I think since it has to go out before our next meeting, I think we'd have to do the rest of it online, but we've officially said we're going to during the public meeting. So the text of it doesn't have to necessarily be part of a public meeting as well.
All right, I'll be out of town for a couple weeks coming up. So would it be okay if I have the letter like early April?
I think it has to be before the 5th of for the council meeting.
Oh, I thought it was the 15th. Sorry.
Okay. The 5th, right?
The 5th? It's the 5th. All right, then I will come up with something sooner than that.
Thank you for doing that, Kathy.
Certainly.
And then we'll be able to bounce it around while you're out of town. That way you'll have your stamp on it. So anything else we want to discuss relative to the South Cooper Mountain Library project?
I'm also out of town for the 3rd week of this month. So any communications may get delayed in the 3rd week of March.
All right, then we're gonna, I guess, kind of assume that if we don't hear from you, then you're happy with what's going around. Otherwise, we're kind of.
Sure.
I'll do my best to get it out as soon as possible.
Let everyone can at least see the first draft. That sounds
All
great.
right, I'll do my best.
Thanks, Kathy. Really
Sure.
appreciate that. And thanks, Glenn, for helping to look it over so that we can send it out.
Sure, my pleasure.
I don't know
Thanks.
if we have special templates to make it look super official.
I could help with that too.
All right, perfect. I think the next one is the budget, unless you'd prefer to do it in a different order, Glenn.
No, that's fine, Andrew. Okay, so moving on to the budget for next year. Next week is the internal budget review process. So to date, we have submitted all of the required portions of our budget for next year, which includes the line items and justifications, the personnel budget, and the goals and objectives. And the purpose of next week's internal budget review is to take all that information, primarily looking at the financial, so the revenues and expenses, and figuring out where we need to be, because we have to have a balanced budget. And just like to share a couple of things with the board as far as where we're at with respect to next year's budget based on information that is available as of today. So start off with the revenue, sources of revenue for the city as a whole are down as a result of COVID. So that includes things like hotel and lodging tax, gasoline tax, even things like, this is not COVID related, but the right-of-way fees that Comcast used to pay to the city were subjected to a court hearing. And so the city is, the amount of revenue is down compared to what was budgeted for a variety of reasons. There's also been increased costs for healthcare, premiums, cost of living increases for personnel. So all these factors, and this is true for all city all city departments. So the library's budget, by the way, is separate from the rest of the cities. There's basically two funds. There is the general fund, which provides funding for all the city departments with the exception of the library. And then the library has a separate fund called the library fund. Ultimately, all the funds for whether it's the general fund or the library fund come from a variety of revenue streams, the bulk of which come from real estate taxes in the city of Beaverton, plus a variety of other taxes and fees, whether it's gasoline tax, hotel and lodging tax, and mentioned the right-of-way fees, and a variety of other fees that the city collects for a variety of purposes. Whether that be, you ran a red light and you have to pay the city, the ticket for that, that's another source of revenue, which, by the way, is down as a result of the pandemic because people were driving less at the beginning of the pandemic. So consequently, revenues are down compared to budget. And so going into next year's budget, there's a budget shortfall in terms of revenue and beginning working capital for both the general fund and the library fund. And so in the lead up to next week's internal budget review, the library managers and I went through our line items and our personnel budgets to see what areas we might be able to reduce in order to close that gap. And when I say reduce, thinking specifically as it applies to personnel, what I'm referring to is what we did was we looked at our current vacancies, and at the city's request, we came up with a list of those vacant positions that we may be able to delay hiring that would result in some cost savings. We did not identify any positions for elimination, but rather looking at existing vacancies, can we delay the hiring of those positions in order to realize some savings? And so we were able to identify a fair amount of savings as a result of that exercise. And that is what we will present next week during the internal budget review process for consideration. And then depending on the overall health of the city's budget this year compared to next, and our beginning working capital, that will determine what, if any, additional cuts to our budget, both in terms of our projected budget for the end of this fiscal year, since we still have another 3.5 months left in this fiscal year, and next year's budget we might need to make in order to be able to have a balanced budget for next year. This year, we're also fortunate in that the city has some ARPA funds available to use to help close that budget gap. But because the impacts will be felt over at least a 2-year period, those budget and those revenue shortfalls as a result of the pandemic, so not only will this year be a challenge for us in terms of closing that gap, but next year as well. And next year, in fact, may be even pose a greater challenge because we won't have the luxury of any ARPA funds available to help us bridge that gap. And so, as I mentioned, we have gone through our line items, our personnel budget, to identify any additional cost savings. And we're hopeful that the savings that we were able to identify will be sufficient to close that gap. But we'll have a better idea of exactly where we stand in approximately 1 week's time. Now, that said, going forward, one of the challenges that we've had historically in the library in order to have a sustainable budget is our personnel costs are rising on average somewhere between 8 and 10% a year as a result of cost of living increases, step increases, insurance premiums and the like. Whereas our the revenue that we receive is going up on average by about 3 to 4%. So as you can see, that's not sustainable in the long run. So, and currently we receive approximately 55% of our revenue from the county versus 45% from the city. So in order to help us be, our library budget to be sustainable in the long term, what I have proposed to the city manager and the finance director is for the city to close that gap between what we receive from the county and what we receive from the city to over a 3-year period. And just to give you an idea of what that gap is, this year's budget, there's approximately a $2.1 million gap between what we receive from the county versus what we receive from the city. So over a 3-year period, it's my hope and my intent that the city would be able to close that gap by increasing our funding by approximately $600,000 to $700,000 a year, so that we could close that gap and we wouldn't be in this position of having to look at cuts to our budget in order to have a balanced budget. That said, given the realities of the decreased revenue as a result of the pandemic and other sources, that's going to be a challenge. So, but that I believe is in the long term, that is a viable way for the library to achieve a balanced budget going forward. But the next couple of years, it's going to be a challenge to get there. So, but as I said, we will know more and exactly and precisely where we're at with respect to our budget and any additional cuts that we might need to make going forward. And just for comparison purposes, of the 12 member libraries of the Washington County Cooperative Library Services, there's only one whose city, so of the 12, 9 are municipal libraries, 3 are association libraries. Of those 9 municipal libraries, there's only one whose city actually provides more than they receive or equal to or more than they receive from the county, and that's Hillsborough. Hillsborough actually receives, public library receives about 55% of its revenue from the city versus 45% from the county. So I've cited that as an example. So, you know, remember that campaign, those of you who were basketball fans back in the 90s, there's a marketing slogan, "Be like Mike," in reference to Michael Jordan. So a slogan for our library could be like Hillsborough with respect to our funding. And so if this board were to ask me, well, what can we do to help increase library funding? Well, then I might reply that this board might consider a similar approach to the council with respect to library funding as to the approach for approval of the new branch library, and that support and encouragement rather of the council to increase the library's funding to at least match what it receives from the county, so that the library budget can be sustainable in the long term. So with that, I will pause and take any questions that a member of this board might have.
I guess going with your hypothetical, if we were to write a letter, when would that letter need to be received or sent? When are they going over the budget items, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
Well, the good news on that is it actually doesn't come to the council and the budget committee, of which the council is a member. So actually the letter could be written to the budget committee, because all the budget committee includes, I think it's 6 members of the public in addition to the city council. So that doesn't come before the budget committee until May. So you actually have, the board actually has some time available to them in order to, if the board decides to go that route.
So it sounds like that's something that we could discuss and decide on at another meeting and see what people think of my writing skills for another potential letter. All right.
Any other comments about budgeting, funding, possible letter writing campaign by Cathy, apparently?
Or anyone else who's interested.
For writing, I always say no. Maybe we can present it, or like talking, it's okay for me, but more formal way of writing is very hard. I don't want to miss any grammar, and it's okay. But as you were talking about the real estate fund, but now the real estate market is crazy. So when there is an increase, won't we be able to get more funds, more revenue on that? Or
Yes, so Sarah, if there is an increase in revenue, either this year or next, so that would go to offset the and go towards our beginning working capital. And so that would help to close that gap. Unfortunately, the revenue that we anticipated receiving, even over the course of this fiscal year, with the expectation that the economy would come back once we're starting to come out of the pandemic, hasn't materialized. But that said, if the economy should turn around and additional sources of revenue be received, yes, then they would go towards closing that gap. And then in terms of when real estate taxes are received by the city, I'm not sure, but I think that's later in the year. And so that may actually not come until after the budget is approved. But there may be other sources of revenue that may come in prior to then. But then again, real estate taxes is about close to 60% of the revenue that the city receives.
thank you.
Any other questions for Glenn about the budget? Mei, Kathleen? All right, sounds like you've got lots of numbers to handle, Glenn, or to tell other people to handle.
So on that budget line with the comment card, I was wondering how we are going to support. See, to this month we got a comment saying all the security guard in and out, like 4 out of 6 or something. It was 4 was concerned about the security. Yeah, 3, 4, yeah.
Yeah.
So will it be addressed by the city, or are we going, or the library is going to address it?
Yeah.
So
we did receive 3 comments about library security. They were all from the same individual, written over a period of about 5 or 6 weeks. That said, we have a vacant half-time building monitor position, which we're holding open, and we're not filling again, subject to or waiting on information that we receive during the internal budget review process, which will then determine whether or not we actually have funding available to fill that position. That said, we did hire 2 new supervisors over the course of this year in order to have more support on the floor for staff and dealing with a variety of incidents. That has been successful in providing more support for staff and dealing with those incidents. So even if we weren't able to fill that position, we do have an increased number of supervisors available to assist staff in dealing with incidents as they occur. And then in the long term, the city, and this is now moving into the director's report a little bit, but the city recently convened an internal homeless task force to address the city's growing houseless population and come up with strategies to address that both in the short and the long term. And we're certainly, we've seen an increase in the number of incidents in the library recently, and a good number of those incidents do appear to involve folks who are experiencing houselessness. So this is something that is a priority of the cities. But that said, there are no magic bullets, and this is a long-term process in addressing the needs of the city's growing houseless population, whether that be the siting of a homeless shelter or working with the county and other local social service agencies to provide a variety of services for those individuals. We have close working relationships on a daily basis with the police and others, and responding to incidents that occur in and around the library. But again, it's not something that's going to be solved anytime soon. But that said, the city is, again, it is a priority of the city staff and of the city council, and there are a number of efforts underway in order to address the situation. And with that, you should know that many municipalities in the Pacific Northwest are also struggling with this issue, as we have all seen an increase in the number of houseless individuals. And there's a concerted effort to try to address those issues, but it's going to take some time. And then on a positive note, a recruitment front, we recently hired our first ever technology librarian, who started last month. He's a former part-time reference assistant whose name is Chuck Quilty. And the charge of the technology librarian is to work with library leadership to recommend, maintain, and update technology offerings at the Beaverton Library, and also to provide training to staff and patrons in both formal and informal settings on technology. So we're very excited about that. And that's a perfect segue to talk about another exciting upcoming event, and that is, please save the date, May 12th, for the grand opening and ribbon cutting for the new makerspace. So similar to the ribbon cutting rather that we did 2 months ago, Kristin, I think it was, December, 3 months ago, whenever that was, for the new study cubes. We'll be doing our next ribbon cutting will be for the new makerspace. So that's scheduled for May 12th. Members of this board are invited, along with members of the Friends Board, the City Council, City Manager, and other dignitaries. So we hope that you will attend and be present for that exciting event. And then let's see, one other thing I want to mention and then pause so that we can get to the comment cards. We are waiting on word from the state about our LST grant application for the purchase of a bookmobile and a limited duration outreach specialist to help develop programs and drive the bus. We're expecting to hear back sometime next month on whether or not we have received those funds. And Once those funds are received, it's subject to council approval. So if this board were looking to support that project, you know what I would recommend, because it does require the council to commit funds to funding 2 months of that limited duration outreach specialist position this year to the tune of about $10,000, and then also next year to continue with the project, lest the new bookmobile start collecting cobwebs for lack of use. So I'll be happy to keep this board apprised of that and see if there is any interest in helping to support that project by encouraging the city council to approve the grant if it's received.
So to my thought, it's like bulletin points adding for following support the following projects and add 1, 2, and 3 in one letter itself, if possible. Because they should not be also overwhelmed when we are setting like 1, 2, and 3 and supporting each individuals. And sometimes like, okay. So it's like if it is 1 and we can mention all the projects. Anything we want is like finally the funds.
I think this one has to wait until the grant is approved or not, until the money appears from the grant. We can ask them for money, but they'd have to do the whole thing themselves, and I don't think that's what they're looking for. But yes, Sarah, it'd be nice if we could just send one big letter instead of everything. But I think at this point, we just might bother the city council over time. Unless everyone else wants to do it a different way. All right.
On continuation of the budget, are we still planning to provide the internet hotspots around the library?
Yes, Sarah, actually, we have, I think 24 hotspots that we added to the Library of Things collection this year. So those are in circulation and they're very much in demand. Does that answer your question?
I'm asking for the internet. During the pandemic, we expanded the internet.
It went outside the library.
The building, yes, we did. We extended the Wi-Fi access outside of the building. That project was actually completed back in September.
Yeah, are we continuing or are we downgrading that one due to budget constraint?
Oh no, that is actually the Wi-Fi services provided by the county. So the good news is that that is not subject to any budget cuts from the city. If the county were to cut funds, that would be a different story.
Got it.
All right, any other questions for Glenn? Glenn, anything else you want to cover from your director's report?
Nope. Thank you, Andrew.
All right, before we move to the comment cards, I just wanted to bring up 2 things. First off, next meeting, we're planning to have the Visioning Advisory Board present. I think they're getting however much time, 10, 15 minutes, something like that, to present what the vision for Beaverton is. Just something to look forward to. And then I believe this addresses something Sarah mentioned earlier. The presentation to the council, because of how weird things are, it sounds like we can actually present at the end of the year a combined 2021, 2022, this is what we've done the past 2 years sort of thing. So unless anyone wants to try and force it otherwise, I think that's our current plan for the presentation, is to roll it all up, and towards the end of the year, we'll start building that and then present it. I don't know when we'll start focusing on that a little better, but we'll start getting a date. It should be towards the end of the year to present to City Council what the library's been up to during the pandemic.
So I haven't been here for one of those before. Is it that we attend a City Council meeting or do they come? Could you just like tell a little bit more about what that presentation is?
So it is a presentation about our board, what we did or what we are doing, what is the goal to the of elected city members in the city hall. So it's optional for the board members to be there, and
Yeah.
Glenn and Andrew will be there to present.
Yes, it's optional for other people to come and do the presentation, but the board as a whole normally comes together and puts the presentation, the slides together and works on the slides. But it's presented to the city council at the city council meeting. Whether or not that's remote or not, I don't know. But it would be us attending their meeting and showing them our slides and saying, here's what the library's been up to, here's what the advisory board's been up to over the past, normally it's a year, but 2 years in this particular case. And I've only done it once because then the pandemic happened. So Sarah's our expert.
Thank you.
It's not like that, but I to my remembrance, I think we did it in the month of March or April, and we were planning before the pandemic to articulate the presentation, and then we started the remote or the
Yeah. It's been a while since the library has presented to the city council.
Yeah.
All right. Any other business? That was all I had as just miscellaneous, but anything else before we switch to the comment cards? All right, that'll be our closeout then. So it looks like we've got a bunch of comments, but they're mostly from the same person. That's useful knowledge to have. So thanks for bringing that up, Glenn. Does anyone want to read any of the comment cards? Has everyone had a chance to at least look at them? Oh, go ahead, Kathleen. You're muted.
Sorry, I mute myself. I was just volunteering to read the comment cards if you wanted.
Go ahead.
Right, it says, please increase security, add security guards inside and out, and enforce safety rules for patrons. I don't feel safe here at all. You are not doing enough to stop the people who have trashed this building. Why don't you hire security guards to ensure the cleanliness, external, outside, sanitation, and safety of its patrons?
And do you want to read the last one? That way you're just that one person.
Sure. Please hire security guards for this library, in or out or both. It's a scary place to visit and walk into. Now people are shouting outside.
All right. Does somebody else want to read from the other people? Go ahead, Mei.
Sorry, what about new Russian books? The old dirty books here are shame. They are the same for 15 years. And the other one is provide plastic umbrella sleeves at entrance so patrons won't drip water inside the library on rainy days. That's all.
So Glenn, do you have any insight onto those, either of those?
I do. I did follow, I have an opportunity to follow up with our collections manager, and she assured me that we have in fact purchased new Russian books within the last 15 years. That said, given what's happening currently in the Ukraine and the moratorium, for lack of a better word, on Russian produced goods, it may be a little bit difficult for us to obtain new Russian materials in the short term. We'll do our best, and we'll continue to add books to the collection. That's one of the city's priority languages. So we'll do our best to continue purchasing new Russian books as well as books in other city priority languages.
And then the umbrella, I don't know what the umbrella, is there a spot for them? Is there a umbrella stand?
We could, we'll explore that and see if that's a service that we could provide. I'm sure you've seen that in other places where they have plastic that you could grab to insert your wet umbrella into. So we could explore that and see if what the level of need is to the extent that we're able to do that, and see if we could make that happen.
I didn't think umbrellas were a thing in the Pacific Northwest.
Touche. They're certainly not as prevalent as where I come from in the Midwest. That's for sure. Although it rains a lot more here.
It does, but no umbrellas. So before I close out the meeting, any other business or any other library associated items you'd like to bring up, something you'd want to see on the agenda for next time? Now's the time. All right, it sounds like we're good. So I guess I'll call this meeting adjourned at 7:30, exactly on time. And we'll see you all next, I believe it's the 15th of April.